Good day, everybody. Our next talk is titled Sailing the Psychedelic Seas.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Good. Okay. This panel, it's not really a talk, it's a panel, and called Sailing the Psychedelic Seas. And the idea of the panel kind of emerged at a panel that I did at the Altered Conference this last November in Berlin. And the idea is really to give you all a chance to participate and take advantage of whatever experience the four of us have gleaned and have this be more of an interaction. So if you want to move closer, feel free. Very briefly, we'll each introduce ourselves and then sort of take it from there, and it's up to you in a way where it goes. My name is Rio Hahn. I'm a founding director of the Institute of Ecotechnics. In the early 80s, in the late 70s, we built a research vessel at Heraclitus, and I took it on a 2-year, 2,000-mile expedition up the Amazon River doing ethnopharmacological research. Professor Richard Evans Schultes, the father of modern ethnobotany, was my mentor, and that's how I got started in the field. And so I'm now going to pass it to Will. We'll introduce ourselves and then open up the floor.
Okay. Thanks. I'll introduce a little bit about myself just because I think it may help in terms of the angle, how you hear what I have to say. So my name is Will Siu. I'm a psychiatrist based in New York City in private practice. I'm also a therapist on the MDMA for PTSD trials that MAPS is running, specifically at the University of Connecticut, where we're focused on treating people of color in the study and also treating race-based trauma. Ethnically, my family is from Nicaragua. I have Chinese ancestors and Nicaraguan ancestors. Kind of first in my family to go to college, and I'm 38, had no interest in psychedelics, let alone taking them 4 years ago. So I'm not like a lifelong. I really came into this through healing, the healing work, and not through kind of the festival burner scene as other people have.
My name is George Greer. I'm a psychiatrist also, and in the early 80s I administered MDMA to people when it was still legal, wrote it up, and in the 90s was one of the co-founders of Hefter Research Institute. This is our 25th year, and we've done most all the psilocybin, funded most all the psilocybin research in this country. And I'm also involved with MAPS and the MDMA therapist training, going through myself, and involved with the USONA Institute that's doing the final phase 3 for psilocybin for depression.
Hey everybody, my name is Tim Crespi, and I am a licensed therapist in Portland, Oregon. I opened a center called Somatic Center Portland, which is a body-centered therapy center. We have 17 practitioners, and 6 of us are working on being one of the first expanded access sites for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. What brought me into this realm was I was a street kid in New York and diagnosed with clinical depression and was offered crack and heroin, and some strange fellow who was really connective offered me LSD, which changed my life, and I could no longer be depressed, and that was one of the pinnacle moments of my life many years ago, and so I have a lot of respect for these medicines and this work.
Frank, do we have another microphone?
Yes, we do.
So maybe, so let's just start. I mean, raise your hand, you get the mic, and the idea kind of is if you've had experience or you haven't had experience. If you've had difficult moments, enlightened moments, or just kind of wondering about other substances.
This first gentleman right here, were you talking about coming to using psychedelics through a clinical type idea. How did that happen, and what was it like?
So Frank, I think this is going to be one of the ones we should probably turn the camera off, because I'm careful about talking about. I'm a licensed.
What effects you're getting, and how you're dosing, and what the effects are. Just a quick overview to kind of get someone that doesn't know anything about it up to speed a little bit.
Okay, so you've never.
Introduce themselves before they ask questions. You can just say your name.
Joe Carter.
So let me see if I'm clear. So you've never taken a psychedelic substance?
Yeah, but for recreation.
Well, just so we understand what your experience is, do you mind telling us?
Well, it was a long time ago.
Okay.
I was, 20-something or 19 or something, and we experimented with acid a little bit.
Okay.
And I barely even remember the experience. But so now I'm wondering what you guys are doing now, today, I assume this is not necessarily recreational, it's medicinal. But I don't know anything about it and what you're, achieving or.
We could probably talk about 4 hours about that question. But basically there are two, psilocybin and MDMA are being studied for treatment of people. MDMA for PTSD, psilocybin primarily for depression. But it's also being studied for addictions. And the usual dose of psilocybin is 25 milligrams, which would very roughly equal about 5 grams of mushrooms. The doses of MDMA range from like about 70 to 125, followed by a booster of about half that dose, milligrams. And there's a lot of talk therapy with MDMA about their trauma. Psilocybin is just they go inside, lie down, and many people have a mystical type experience. This seems to be very healing for them. So that's the 1 minute synopsis, unless you have something more specific.
Yeah, I will say that even though it's been a long time, I would say you're here at Burning Man, and that probably had an effect. And I think a lot of us have found that to be true, that, these were life-changing experiences. They, changed our consciousness and changed the course of our lives. Certainly happened in my case. I think that's probably true of everybody here. So, the microphone, where is it?
I have it.
Go for it.
You had mentioned that the final child from number 3, I think you said, for the psilocybin. Is that the one that's taking place? Do you have a timeline, or do you know kind of how long that will take? And is it going to extend out of the States? I'm from Canada, so.
Out of the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the trials are only for the United States. It's U.S. FDA approval, so only the United States. But there is work in the EU, for Europe, is also starting now to get it approved in different countries in Europe. But nothing is started in Canada. I've talked to a researcher in Vancouver, Evan Wood, who runs the big addiction center there, and he's very interested in doing psilocybin for opiate addiction, because it's a horrible sort of problem in Vancouver, fentanyl overdoses. Yeah, so it's just in the United States. And was there another part to your question? Or? Oh yes, how long? So most MDMA is probably a year ahead of psilocybin, and they're guessing 2022 is what they're putting out, but 2021. So I say that's what they're putting out because this has never been done before. How long? When will we get to the moon? When we were doing the moonshot, like how long will that take? And give me a budget. So a lot of it is just unprecedented, and a lot of variables that we're not in control of. But I think that's a reasonable ballpark. Yeah. But before it's approved, as soon as the phase 3 studies start and have plenty of subjects, they can do what Tim talked about, expanded access. People can get treated with these medicines, and they pay for it while the final phase 3 study is going on, because that's going to take, you know, a couple of years or so. And so groups are forming. I'm involved in one around the country to offer that starting next year. So there will be places around the country where people with severe PTSD can have access to that treatment, but it's many, many hours of therapy, so it's going to cost something, and insurance won't cover the session days, you know, the 3 session days.
A couple of questions. When you were working with Richard Schultes as a sprintist or whatever, was there any like mantra that he would work with while he was working, or any like central kind of mission that he was on that you remember that you could share? That's one thought that I was wondering. The next to the panel is this. From like the clinical vantage point, I see you guys jumping through hoops to try to get access to these materials for your patients and for exploration and understanding. But do you anticipate a time when maybe the whole country might have access to these materials, clean, over-the-counter materials, well-made, that they can trust? Do you see that in our future sometime soon? Or is that something you're working towards, rather than it just being access to patient or people with PTSD, access to whole, healthy consciousness explorers?
I've been doing this a long time. Personally, I mean, it's been written about a lot. It's certainly helped a lot of people who aren't, you know, mentally ill, who don't have major depression or PTSD, helped them in many ways. And in Michael Pollan's recent book, How to Change Your Mind, he talks a lot about that. You know, the value it could have for people who are not mentally ill or have a diagnosis. But for that, the FDA only controls things that are used to treat illnesses. You know, they can't authorize a controlled drug, especially for well people. And so that would not be allowed. And so acts of Congress would have to be passed to set up a whole other system to license, set up centers, all the legalities. An act of Congress would be required to do that. And I definitely could see that happening, I would say, anytime between 20 and 75 years from now. It's just my personal, you know, guess, because, and we're not talking about that now because that could trigger a negative narrative in the media. You know, you've heard the criticism, oh, the medical marijuana people, they just really want to legalize it. This is just a doorway to legalize marijuana, which is, I think, partly true, but medical marijuana has its own value as a medicine. But it's not helpful to have people having narratives in the media that are against what we're trying to do for the patients. So we don't really talk about for well people at this point. After it's approved, I think it'll be fine. You know, that's the next step, obviously.
Go back to your first question. Dr. Schultes was a mentor for me for organizing the Amazon expedition. We worked with a shaman that he had worked with. He took the second laboratory-equipped ship up the Amazon, the Alpha Helix from Scripps. And they had a GCMS on board and did extractions of fresh material in the field. And then the ship had to leave, and so he encouraged us to go up, my associates and I, to go up the Amazon with our ships. We became the third laboratory-equipped ship to study plant medicines in the wild, fresh material, and worked with the shaman that Dr. Schultes had worked with. Did botanical collections, chemical extracts. My main experience there was with ayahuasca in terms of a personal experience, but it also was in those days kind of, this is from 80 to 82, kind of a groundbreaking expedition. Wade Davis, Terrence McKenna, and Dennis McKenna all participated in the expedition at that time, and it was a different era. You know, we were out there, we were experiencing, we were exploring, we were trying to discover things about these medicines and the use of them by different cultures. So that was a very integral part of what we were doing, was interacting with cultures, see how they use the medicines. And of course now I think it's interesting because we have a very different climate, different political climate, different philosophical climate, and much more knowledge as the years have gone on.
Hi, I'm Jack. Something that occurred to me in the last year or so is the cultural, spiritual ideals of the North American Native Americans and the natives of many regions, and the conflicts that came when Western society pushed into a cultural clash there. I'm wondering, specifically as you were talking about the natives of South America, how what you found with these like earth-based spiritualities that are really strong and connected with respect and have a lot of integrated lifestyle with the native land that they're from. How much would you say that psychedelics were part of their lifestyle, and how frequent, and how much did that affect their spiritual perspective and lifestyle?
Well, I would say a tremendous amount. Really, those native cultures that use psychedelics, much of the culture is based around it. Of course, there is the healing aspect. There's also the use of various substances for rites of passage, something that unfortunately really doesn't exist in our modern culture, to where, in terms of, say, the Native American vision quest. But the similar thing happens in South American cultures. There also, for example, we participated in a festival that occurs in this particular area in the Amazon 3 times a year, and the teachings are passed on through dances, and during those dances people are under different psychedelics or coca for the energy, the food aspect. And so it's very, in a way that I won't say the culture is based around it, but we have to really have tremendous respect and awe in many ways for how they discovered these substances and how to mix them. I mean, ayahuasca has many different variations, and just how did they ever figure this out? So really at the heart of the culture, and of course the American Peyote Church, which under American political rule became an official church so they could operate, and so on. But because these are all integral to the culture. Somebody else wants to address that one. Microphone.
I'm Sophie, and I'm curious in the clinical or therapeutic use of psychedelics, how much practices like meditation and shamanic practices are used as well, in conjunction with the psychedelics, or how they're used.
So in the research sessions, there's really nothing substantial shamanic about it, or there's no formal meditation. There's a little bit of ritual at the beginning, like usually a chalice with the capsule of psilocybin, and I'm not sure how they do the MDMA, but probably a little sort of mild ritual. But there's no meditation instruction like, oh, this is how you meditate during psilocybin or MDMA. There's no instruction like that. and no shamanic. In shamanism, it's like the shaman is doing some direct healing on you in a way that's would be considered non-material or something, and that's definitely not part of this. The idea is just to have the person go inside, be with themselves, and experience that altered state, and surrender to the process, and trust the inner healing abilities of our own mind-body system. That's the general approach.
Yeah, also, so the protocols in phase 2 and phase 3 are such that the therapy is non-directive and somatic-oriented, or body-centered, which, from my point of view, requires a certain level of awareness practice, without even saying, without any meditation instruction, just to enter into a therapeutic dialogue in a non-directive way is going to elicit an awareness of the body, and in my experience typically does. And so in that way, the sessions are a meditative process in a way. I think of meditation or contemplative practices as practices that are building awareness in a way that we wouldn't ordinarily do so. And so the therapy is in that way leading people to become a lot more aware of their own bodies, what's going on inside, and the nature of what's happening in the room as well.
Yeah, in terms of, I would also answer your first question. Shamanic practice is not at all, but I would say meditation and other stuff not enough. And I think that it's not formally part of any of this, but body work is, as Tim said, is a big one. Most of the experienced people on the MDMA teams have done holotropic breath work, somatic experiencing, Hakomi, and a slew of things. So I think naturally it becomes a part of it. It's just not a formal part. I was talking a little bit just before this talk about opening. I think my talk was like psychedelic clinics on the horizon, where my plan is also to be opening up one of these expanded access sites. I have a ketamine psychotherapy practice in New York City. I'm looking to make that a group practice in preparation. Where I'm looking not only to partner with psychologists, but also body workers and other healers of other different healing modalities. I honor that Western psychiatry and psychology is not the only way, and it's definitely not. It doesn't really honor the completeness of what's necessary, and that healing work with these medicines does not just happen during the peak experience of the day taking psilocybin or MDMA, but really it's the weeks, I think, in the integration of that experience over the weeks after that. I haven't seen any research, but I like to throw out the number 80 to 90% of the long-term healing that happens from psychedelic assisted therapies, I think, happens in the weeks and months after. And because of that, I was also talking about cost earlier. How do we get the cost down of these psychedelic therapies? Because it's going to be restrictive, very much so in the beginning, with 2 therapists on the MDMA study. Myself as a psychiatrist, working with a psychologist in New York City, you're looking at a combined about $600 an hour if you're going to hire someone to do this stuff for you, which I couldn't even afford. So can we do some of these peak experiences with other, with psychologists, master's level therapists, or even potentially with ketamine? I won't go in deep into this, but we were talking about it earlier, where I can prescribe ketamine, they can take it, and they're responsible with it, and they take it to a healer who is not as expensive, and continue to do healing work in the weeks after with a body worker, etc. With an underground therapist. I'm not advocating that, but there's other avenues of potentially getting really good healing work cheaper and more complete with people who are not just licensed therapists.
Hi, my name is Zach. Thinking about Terrence's stoned ape theory, is there any sort of evidence or anything that might be linked towards that in any research that has been done? I'm familiar with one of the ayahuasca studies that showed enlargement of neuroreceptor sites with ayahuasca, if I remember correctly. Is that related to the possible advancement of our species' state of consciousness as a whole?
There's no research on that. It's true that, I'm not sure about MDMA, but psilocybin causes the release of something called brain-derived neurotropic factor. Neurotrophic meaning brain nerve cell growth. So we think that their nerve cells can grow, but that's light years away from the creation of language, from a stoned ape. And I don't know of anyone even looking at that theory to do any kind of research on it. And it's hard to imagine how you could do research on it because it's so far in the past, and what are you going to study? I mean, fossil remains. It's hard to study.
Maybe a different way of approaching your question is that one of the concepts that Tim Leary worked with was the idea that we have, let's say, a fixed pattern of neural firing in the brain. And so that pattern, there are pathways established that we use in normal day-to-day operation. And when you take a substance, a psychedelic substance especially, you release kind of that pattern for a period of time. And that gives you an opportunity to do some work, make new connections. And that's why many people overlook this, but really one of the most important periods in any psychedelic experience is the period of reintegration. And that's critical because if you kind of visualize that during that period, as the substance wears off, its effect wears off, your brain is falling back into, if you will, new synaptic patterns. So what you're doing at that time, you might end up in a better state or a worse state. So it's particularly important to pay attention to that period of time whenever you're doing a substance.
What would you recommend for someone who's a therapist now who'd like to integrate this into their practice or move towards getting involved in what's going on? I went to CIIS. I studied with Ralph Metzer like 15 years ago and went to the MAPS conference and everything, but I still don't really see like how to really get involved.
So I can talk about that kind of as a person who just finished my training just a couple of years ago. So I mean, I was just lucky because I happened to get connected to MAPS and Rick early on, just because kind of right place at the right time. I think formally through MAPS and to become an MDMA therapist, there's a therapist training program that I think they're going to be publicly putting out applications for, I think in the next 2-3 months. So getting on the list on MAPS, I think if you just Google MAPS therapy training, it'll come up and there's a list right now. So that's like the practical thing of how does one get involved with MDMA. The other thing I'm really encouraging and pushing people to do is to work with doing ketamine-assisted therapy. It's relatively new in my life, and I started that practice a few months ago. I think the cool thing is, again, it's legal. You can isolate it to a 90-minute or 2-hour experience, so it's more affordable. One can partner with, as a psychiatrist, I'm working with psychologists, again, PhD or master's level, who have interest, and if they work with me, and I feel that they can do good work, I can prescribe it to their patients, they can take it to you, and that's a way of doing, I know the terminology is, is ketamine a psychedelic, but, a consciousness-altering substance legally, currently already with ketamine. So those are some of my ideas.
Yeah, I think it's a great question because I think there are a lot of folks asking that question, and as there's a growing interest and need in being involved, there are seemingly in a lot of ways limited channels to carry forth, and so for me, what I see happening in the communities that I'm involved in is really at a very basic level of connecting. As a practitioner, a lot of practitioners don't particularly reach out or make cold calls to other therapists involved in stuff that they don't know. And for me, that's how I got started, and that's how I got started in this and created community is really just sitting down and connecting with people who are already involved. And what I've found is that while not everybody has the time to do that, the folks that have had the time and made the time, for the most part, we've really connected, and it's given me more insight as to what next steps I want to take.
Hi, I was just wondering, what, in your guys' opinions, is the most important steps to take in order to make this, like, to make this more of a normal thing? Like how pot started off as being this huge ordeal where no one was allowed to do it. It was always illegal, but now we're taking steps into making it a medicine as well as for recreational use. And I noticed that that was more of a social push in order for it to happen. So what steps do you feel are the most important into getting this into a normal thing? Is it a social thing or a government thing?
I'm quoting Rick on a talk that I went to, that he said that, if we look at marijuana, that legalization follows medicalization. I think in the Western world, I'm not going to say what happened in the 60s or with Tim Leary was right or wrong. It was definitely like the community wasn't, the society wasn't ready at that time. Maybe it scared people, and it was too much, so we make it illegal. But if we take them, again, medicalization leads to legalization. I think that's why I think that the way MAPS has done it seems to be the right way to do it. It's not getting shut down right now. And even though I'm a Western psychiatrist, I don't believe that medicalization or medical use of psychedelics is the only way to do healing. I think you could do great healing work outside of the medical context. I think also you can hurt people by doing it that way too. I also think that medically doing psychedelic therapy can also be hurtful in certain ways that people aren't well trained. So I'm not saying that this is the only way, because sometimes people get concerned that, oh, you just want to medicalize. But I just think in the way the culture is right now, once people see evidence and that these are being done in responsible studies, that they'll be more accepting of it as a whole. That's my opinion.
Yes, in medicine and in health in general, safety first. First do no harm. And it's hard to be hurt by marijuana unless you happen to be a schizophrenic person or something. It's obviously safe for recreational use and very few adverse effects, no deaths, etc. But when you get into MDMA, psilocybin, LSD, etc., there's some people, a significant number, maybe a couple of percent or so of the population or more, who could be psychologically harmed, as you said, by having an unsupervised experience, and they get into some panic, or some memory of childhood sexual abuse arises during their session, and they freak out and they're scared. That can just re-traumatize them. So they're emotionally harmed by that. So like there's some ballot initiatives to get psilocybin mushrooms sort of in a legal status, and they vary. The ones I'm familiar with, it's sort of medical psilocybin. But the problem with mushrooms is you never know what the dose is with a plant, so that's tricky. And I guess at my gut level, I'm not sure I would trust a state health department to decide what the best training is for therapists for psilocybin or MDMA, because they don't know anything about it. So, and the other issue politically with the ballot initiatives, and I'm sorry if people here think that's great, is that any kind of ballot initiative, if it gets on the ballot, which is not likely but possible, if it gets in the ballot, then people spend money advertising for it, which is fine, and against it. And so I would think the people against it would have exaggerated advertisements of the danger of psilocybin mushrooms. And, there's always a few horror stories about everything. People die from MDMA, 1 in a million or something, and some pretty, suicides, and even, I know of at least one murder was committed by someone who was already psychotic on mushrooms. You know, the mushrooms just really pushed him over the edge, and he was a veteran, I think, traumatized veteran, and just got in probably some flashback mode and killed somebody. So those kind of stories would be promoted by people and funded by people who don't like psychedelics, or, you know, these all drugs are bad, blah blah blah. So we don't want to set up that kind of narrative in the media, pro-con, before FDA approval. We just don't want to like breathe on anything, because the FDA is incredibly supportive of both of these compounds. And it's just surprising to all of us. And we wanted to not have any, you know, headwinds going forward. So that's my perspective on that.
Another thing that's coming to mind, again, this is from my experience being on the site that really focuses on people of color. And something that I brought, you know, I was thinking about is the media. Michael Pollan writing about this and getting positive press, and the ayahuasca kind of movement, both going to Brazil, Peru, or doing underground ayahuasca stuff in the United States, right? I think it helps. It's no secret that the psychedelic movement, again, is a middle class, upper class white movement. You know, and I've thought to myself, why is it that I've never heard of an ayahuasca underground group getting prosecuted in the United States? I don't think we have data on why that is, but is it because it's a white movement, and people are going and talking to their parents about it, etc. Unlike the marijuana movement, which is very much not so. Like, again, I was talking earlier in my talk about how prosecution from this stuff is very different for people of color and Black Americans. And so, I mean, again, I'm not going to say that's good or bad. I mean, the prosecutions obviously are horrible, but you're thinking, is the psychedelic movement being a white movement a bad thing or a good thing? At this point, I don't know, because maybe it's going to be very helpful that, you know, the sons and daughters of people who, write the law or law enforcement are actually taking this, because maybe that's another avenue of introducing this into Western culture that might be helpful long term to get everyone access to these medicines.
I gave a talk a couple of days ago, and a woman asked, she was African American, about is there research going on for racial trauma and discrimination, because it is traumatic, and there's not on that specifically, an FDA kind of thing. But I just want to tell people, one of the studies Hefter's helping to support is a study in Birmingham, Alabama, for cocaine addicts to receive psilocybin for treatment of cocaine addiction. And a lot of those people are very low socioeconomic status, dropped out of school in elementary school, poor, not well educated, and addicted to cocaine. And their treatment, they're using the music they use is the music that's been used for 30, 40 years. It's Western romantic classical music, which is not really part of the African American culture in Birmingham, I don't think, I would guess. But they are having full mystical experiences with psilocybin, getting off cocaine, turning their lives around, and their whole thinking, really their whole lives, not just the cocaine. And both therapists are very white, but some of their stories is just amazing to hear how they feel they're better off according to their value system and their culture, and it's just really inspired to see that working with this population, because it's really needed. I mean, generally, poor people suffer a lot more than rich people, to be simple about it. So, and the people in this field really want to try to promote that, but the money's so tight, we just go for the low-hanging fruit. What's the easiest way to get the research done efficiently? Big universities or in big towns, etc. So, but I just want to throw that in there, that the African Americans are benefiting, at least in that study.
And I know you're involved with Hefter and USONA, actually, and this is for everyone also, though, and I'm glad diversity is coming up more, well, not a ton in talks and psychedelics, but we're at least talking about it here. I work mostly with MAPS, and Rick, again, I work with him, he's a friend of mine, so we talk a lot about this. Our site has said, Rick, next year they're planning on training 300 MDMA therapists across the country. Can you commit to doing a certain number of people of color, right? Because it's one thing to get a patient in the door that is Black or is Latino, but if they're working with a racial trauma with a therapist that's white, it may or may not work very well. In our site, up until about a little over a month ago, I used to be able to say I was the only non-white psychiatrist working with MAPS. We have 2, and he also works at our site. But I think we have 5 people of color who are therapists at our site, and this isn't a hard statistic, but I only know of one other MAPS therapist right now that's not white, that's working with the site across the country. And again, I don't think it's a, I don't say MAPS isn't doing its job, but I think, and MAPS is really doing an effort to train more therapists of color. But I think it's, I also encourage other groups that work and train therapists that it's one thing to say, I support diversity, this is great, we should do more of this, versus saying, because I've heard things like, well, we don't have more non-white therapists because they don't apply. And sure, that's true, but there could be also and I'm not saying that people should do anything, but it's different than to say, I'm going to put funds or I'm going to put an effort to actually go do talks or to promote talks at the Black Psychologists of Los Angeles to educate on the psychedelic studies, or to support talks or outreach to Latino psychiatrists of New York City to actually make an effort to recruit more psychologists and psychiatrists of color to psychedelic therapy.
Two-part question for you. So first question is introduction to people that are resistant to the idea of psychedelic growth. And for example, my family directly, my father, he has mild interest in it, due entirely probably to my experiences and my relating that to him. And I'm wondering if you have any taglines or conditions that would set up to be the best for him to kind of ease in. Maybe it's microdosing, some kind of studies to point him toward. He's very research-oriented, diet, anything else.
Officially we have to say, don't do this at home. Don't try this at home. It's not like, it's like skateboarding. There's potential dangers, So I feel it's sort of an ethical issue to advise someone I've never met what they should do to prepare for an illegal psychedelic session. It's just something I can't really talk about, but in general, there's a lot of books. Michael Pollan's book talks about how he went and found underground therapists and what that experience was like. That's his story. He's a journalist. There's a lot of information about all of this in general. And I was doing a tea house shift the other day, and this person never had psychedelics, and should I do this? Should I do it? And I said, it's an existential decision on your part. You're the world's expert on you. And it is an existential decision, and I don't think anyone certainly should not be talked into it, but if they're interested, to be given information and support and help to make their own decision. And I also think the most important factor in any experience like this is, what is the person's intention? That's like number one. Do I want to take MDMA to dance? Do I want to recover from PTSD? Or depression? Do I just want to get high and not worry about something? Those are all very different intentions and would probably result in very different kinds of experiences, some maybe not so helpful.
I might add to that, since I come from a different perspective, that if you were going to do that, I would agree also with George that there's a lot of material out there to help in preparation, and then to be with him, prepare the environment, the setting, and to start small and be there as maybe not so much as a guide, but somewhat, and a resource, and to monitor. And especially have the control over the setting, and don't have other influences come in that might disturb that session.
Yeah, I love the question. And for me, it's about, I consider myself to be a harm reduction therapist. a harm reduction addictions therapist. So I work with people struggling with addictions, challenges with addictions, and addictions is a very broad term as well. But there are two kind of overarching models of addictions therapy. One is an abstinence model, where it's all about stopping no matter what, and the other is harm reduction, and I'm in the harm reduction school. Under that umbrella, as a therapist, I can speak to. I'm an advocate for if you choose to do something, if you're going to do it, what are ways in which we can cultivate consciousness and doing it in a way that is going to be the least harmful. In our Zendo, I've given a couple Zendo trainings in Portland, Seattle. Zendo is the psychedelic harm reduction organization here on Playa that's also run by MAPS. We support people who are having difficult experiences on psychedelics or not. And one of the things in training that we come across this gray area where, are we doing harm reduction or are we doing benefit maximization? And what is that gray area? And that's kind of where we're at, is this gray area because of the research that is coming out. A lot of the research that you might read with your father could be obtained on the MAPS website. MAPS posts a lot of their research. Don't they post everything? They post everything. So all of the research that's being done by MAPS is totally public and totally available, and really great to read through. Really interesting, very very fascinating to read through. So any way that you can educate yourself and your dad can educate himself, and you can do that together, that can be a very positive, way of building relationship around if he were or you were to choose to do something together. I always advocate for if you are going to choose to do, say, LSD or any other substance, to know as much about it as you can possibly know about dosage, know about meal preparation, diet. Of course, no matter what you do, being healthy and putting healthy foods in your body is going to be a good idea and going to, maximize benefit in your life. Same goes with taking any kind of psychedelic or any kind of substance. And any way that you can create consciousness and ground and have a meditative process about what you're going to do, that creates awareness and consciousness as well. And there's a lot of reading to do about that as well online, and a lot of materials on how to do that as well. So yeah.
Another good resource that you can take a look at is arrowwid.org, which has a vast amount of material on it, on all different substances and experiences of various people. The microphone.
So I had a question. If you've already decided that you're going to do this and experiment with it for growth, letting go, an important point in your life that you want to try to use this to do good, not check out, not. So what would be a good things for us for that hypothetical person to look for? There would be danger signs that maybe, you've gotten a little bit too far here, you've taken, you're taking it too often, not taking it often enough. You should be taking a whole lot less more often, or a whole lot more less often. I mean, do you have any kind of, I know that's a big target there, but is there any kind of guidelines that you can, just in general?
Well,
go first.
I was was just going to say, it's a very individual thing. So, that's the first thing.
No, I totally agree, and just I'm just refer you back to all the material, the internet books that are out there, and it's just all opinions. You know, I mean, I'm working in science, scientific data, et cetera. There's just no data on that. Really, this would be very useful to someone in that position. So I would just say people should educate themselves as much as possible and make their own decision.
So again, I want to say before you hear my answer that again, I am a psychiatrist, I'm a therapist, but I don't think Western medicine is the only way to do the healing work. But that said, I do think that we are a culture that's very used to psychotherapy. I've had two therapists during that time. One was a Freudian analyst who, again, I don't think the psychedelic work really worked well with him, but that my second therapist was a Carl Jung-oriented analyst who, once we got into it, she admitted she had never taken a psychedelic, but she grew up kind of in a meditative TM community, and she says she's reached these transpersonal states without any psychedelics. So I would say, you know, if psychotherapy is potentially a thing for you or is your current thing, just working with a therapist and keeping them informed about having, you know, what kind of experiences you're having, and have someone basically that knows you, that you're working with, that can check in with you in terms of, you know, is it too much, is it too little, is this crazy, is it not, you know, and just being mindful of what's the therapist's experience. Like my Freudian analyst, I really stopped seeing him because I was clear that he was not able to honor these experiences, that spiritual experiences and visions that people have on psychedelics, versus my Jungian analyst, you know, with some of the legal experiences that I had taking ayahuasca in Peru, when I told her about what I was seeing, was actually excited about, oh, you saw a jester, and oh, that's an archetype, how about we talk about that? So you know, psychotherapy is one way to integrate and stay on track, I think.
Yeah, and maybe another approach is, which ties in with that really, is the concept from scuba diving, which is to use the buddy system. You never go diving on your own. Microphone somewhere? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jade, and I work for MAPS, and so I want to first of all thank you so much for all of your work, and also supporting myself. And I was just curious if you could all say something that you thought was positively surprising about what's currently happening, either in the legal movement or what the FDA has been doing, or what you've seen. Just what do you see as like things that are positive that you were surprised about, and what is currently happening?
I was surprised when Fox News had two really positive segments on MDMA therapy. That was surprising. I was surprised when Rebecca Mercer gave $1 million to MAPS, and she also supports Breitbart and Trump because of veterans. Those were very positive, unexpected surprises, I would say, for me personally. I was surprised when the Usona people first met with FDA saying we want to study psilocybin for cancer patients with anxiety or depression, since that's all the research, and the FDA said, well, why not open it up to anybody with depression? Wow. You know, and surprised, somewhat surprised how supportive the FDA has been for both compounds.
We have time for, just a couple more.
Hi, my name is Joy. I come from a background of, I guess, native indigenous tradition somewhat, but more from an urban context. And I'm curious, there's a lot of research and benefits for mental health, and I think that's awesome. At the same time, I'm also curious about how the tie-in of cultural preservation of traditional ceremonial traditions, and how that plays into this current research.
In terms of the research that's happening, FDA research, it plays no obvious role, except all the researchers and therapists are certainly well aware of the traditional indigenous uses of psychedelics and educated in that. Probably some have gone to South America, worked with an indigenous, related shaman with ayahuasca. But it's not, none of those traditions are part of research protocols or how to run a session. And also, you had wanted to hear from other people about positive things that surprise them. So.
Yeah. So, like, certainly the broad FDA and DEA getting behind MDMA assisted psychotherapy is huge and extremely surprising and really exciting. And on a local level, I opened Somatic Center Portland in March of this year. And folks know that we're slated to be we're working to be one of the expanded access sites, and we had 250 people come to our opening, and that was just on a very local level, but it just showed me that so much community around us are really interested in supporting and being a part of it. I also led three Zendo trainings in the last year, 2 in Portland and 1 in Seattle. The last 2 in Portland and Seattle, we advertised like 3 weeks before the trainings, and they both filled the room and sold out at 110 people each, which is just 3 weeks before a training that's 5 hours long, to have 110 people have no hesitation to go, and we had a waiting list after that. And there were thousands of folks that didn't even hear about it. So there's a lot of growing interest, and a lot of the people are feeling more and more safe to reveal their own experiences and explore their own experiences, and that is very exciting. It makes sense to me. Part of me is like, it's not so surprising. Okay, like that's there. And I'm really excited about it, and it feels really positive.
So I know I keep going back to this, but I go back to it because I think it's important. I think getting more patients in the door from diverse backgrounds that are trying these medicines is critical, and also training more therapists of diverse backgrounds, ethnically and culturally, will be very important for this, because then you're getting people with experience on both ends of the research that can then inform us about the cultural issues that we should be thinking about and working with. Our site, I know one of our sites, again, at the University of Connecticut for the MDMA work, is focused on treating people of color. And our PI, for instance, we're looking at culturally appropriate music for Black Americans, for Latino Americans. It's different than electronic music or some of the other stuff that we play during our sessions. So I think the more patients that we recruit and more therapists, we'll get more information on cultural diversity and other important issues in that realm.
Will Palenque Norte be here at the next burn?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Big yes.
Big yes.
Okay, I think that wraps it up. Thank you to the panel, and in particular, thank you for